Hello and welcome to this special edition of the ILEETA Learning Lab. I'm Joe Willis, the Deputy Executive Director for ILEETA, and today I'm here with Jay Cooper. Now, he's going to be at the 26th Conference and Expo in St. Louis, Missouri, the 16th through the 21st of March, and we've got about 130 amazing courses coming. And Jay, I'm super excited to see yours and to kind of connect with you. Jay's going to be talking about a concept. It's called reality check, principle-based performance under pressure. And we're going to explore that today during this conversation, kind of what that course is, what it's going to look like there at ILEETA, and then ultimately, what there is to this concept. So without any further ado, Jay, I'm just going to kick it right over to you. Tell us a little bit about what you're going to be talking about at the conference.
Thanks, Joe. It's a pleasure to be here, and it's an honor to be asked to present at ILEETA. The idea behind reality check is that it's judgment under pressure and treating thinking the same way that we actually treat tactics. When things are put under pressure, you'll find that it will reveal gaps in perception, posture, and permissions. It's not so much that systems fail people. Not so much that intentions fail people. It's the systems in place that fail people. What happens a lot of the time when it comes to decision making is we have all this wonderful training that has grown over the years, borderline unrecognizable from when I first started back in way back in the day. And we train punches and cuffs, but we don't train thinking nearly enough. Reality check, the idea behind that is to actually put some thought process behind our actions. It's not so much what we do as why we do it, and more importantly, how we then explain why we did it. And a lot of that comes around simple things like the way we frame risks involved in situations. We often get into very complicated dissections and discussions about scenarios, and this is very good for after the event. But a decision that I make in seconds, I'll write up about for hours. It will be discussed and debated for weeks and months. It will take years to go through the courts, and then it will stand for decades as an example of a good or a bad thing. So that kind of cascading time effect from a single action is something which I think is very, very important we understand without necessarily being overawed by the consequences that are in there. Framing risk. I have a very simple method for doing that, which is there are only two types of risk that exist in the world, and that is known risk and an unknown risk. Most of the problems that we tend to find ourselves creating or in are when we pretend that the known is unknown. We label a call, we get comfortable with something, we lock in on approach, and then the moment something unexpected happens, we're late, both cognitively and tactically. The idea behind reality check is to give people a way to stay aware of what they don't know, because that keeps the options open. Known keeps me grounded, unknown keeps me adaptable.
I love how you said that. Known keeps me grounded, unknown keeps me adaptable. And in the training methodology, your approach to training, you're intentional about improving the knowns, if I'm hearing you correctly, making comfort and safety and trust in what we know to be true, but still leaving a little bit of space for variability in the unknowns to develop the confidence in those situations where there is a portion of unknown in the situation. Is that what I'm hearing from you?
Very much so. It's actually a reflection, if you'll permit me the diversion. When I was coming up in the martial arts world, like so many other, I started in traditional based systems because primarily that was all that was around at the time. Now, the oft-quoted story of the black belt losing the street fight to the guy that hasn't done a day's training in his life but has incredibly bad intentions and is willing to act on them is something that we actually still hear to this day, even with the advent of MMA and effective pressure testing within martial arts. What often is lacking is context. MMA as a skill set, I mean, obviously it's more of a rule set than an art, although there is a case to be made. It's becoming an art in its own right. It's fine for one-on-one. Doesn't mean you can't transfer that ability across the line to fight multiple opponents or operate within a more law enforcement, tactical or operational environment. It just needs additional context for those skills to be transferable. So when I was training in these traditional martial arts, you have person does X, you do Y, they're on the floor, you start again. Person does Y, you do Z, there, whatever it happens to be. Then when you start sparring and you start actually applying this stuff, when you do X and you don't end up at Y, you end up at J, you're like, okay, now what? Because you have a solution for a very specific situation. But as soon as you observe something, as in the observation in this case might be throwing a jab at it, it instantly changes. So you're no longer cause does not always mean effect. It can be another cause to then become another effect, and so on and so on. You end up in this physical spiral. Once you take that concept within a physical realm, the mental realm does the same thing. We get locked in an idea of, if I go in with this approach and I'll get that response back, then I'll have this, or then I'll have that, or then I'll have the other. I actually, a book I wrote called The Hound's Tale, which is a series of adventures, sometimes misadventures, from my life growing up. There was one incident I remember very, very clearly from when I was working as a uniform officer in Tunbridge Wells, which is a place in Kent. Now, as the UK bobbies, we generally don't have an awful lot of tools beyond a baton, cuffs, and a little bit of spray. The rest of it's done with voice and physicality. We don't have access to firearms directly, and a lot of the tools, again, that officers even to this day in England have, I didn't. But I did have a lot of experience in combat. And I came across a situation where there was a bouncer having an issue with a patron, and I went up to calm it down. So a confident cop walks in. I'll diffuse and de-escalate this situation beautifully with my mere presence and my northern charms in a southern setting. So I went in and I said, is there a problem here, gentlemen? Because normally just being there will stop anyone to be arrested. And the guy that was the agitator, not the bouncer, it was the patron, turned and looked at me, one eye down, one eye up, and went, jog on, pretty boy, the grown-ups are talking. I just blanked, because what he'd done is, I had this plan of, right, okay, I'm going to go in there and then we'll have this conversation. What I hadn't prepared for was him just completely disregarding my presence altogether. And I ended up scrambling because I had nothing in my backup that I prepared for. And it was a little bit of an eye-opening moment. So that was probably the genesis of a lot of the change in my training, of knowing what you know, but also being prepared for what you don't know, and not being tied to outcomes, just going up there, doing what you do and seeing what unfolds, responding to what is happening rather than what I think might be happening, or more importantly, what I think is going to happen.
Yeah, again, how you said that, what I think is going to happen often leads us in so many ways. I mean, we're talking right now about these physical confrontations, but the same thing is true going into a conversation. Difficult conversation from a leadership perspective, or an interview. If we have a preconceived notion of what we know the outcome to be, there's oftentimes where we are surprised by what the other party gets as a vote in that. I think, one of the things I'm really fascinated to hear your perspective on is, what does training under pressure or stress exposure look like when it's done right? So you've talked a lot up to this point of getting the knowns, being prepared for the unknowns, and being confident in that unknown environment. And a lot of times what folks are doing is they're putting people in these high pressure stress test situations without the skills to set them up for success there. So there may be some negative consequences of that. So kind of talk me through, what does right look like and how do we set up for it?
Everything we do when it comes to pressure needs to be progressive. You've nailed it. You cannot just go, here's your boxing gloves, off you go, let's see how we stand out. Some people will naturally instantly adapt to that. I know I've arrested a few of those guys over the years that have never done a day's training in their life, but fight like Brock Lesnar on PCP. Conversely, I've found guys that I thought were going to be a handful, but they psychologically couldn't engage themselves enough to actually do it. Physical is the way that most of us consider pressure. So you start off with a skill, and I'm going to keep this within a boxing framework, not because we all need to box, but it's a very simple frame of reference. There's basically 4 punches. a jab across, a hook, and an uppercut, and a few variations thereof. So you start off with a stance, and then, okay, how are you standing? Then you learn how to move. Then you put the guard up. Then the punches come out. Then the punches come out on a pad or a bag or something. Then you move and hit. Then you hit, and then you get out the way. Then you and so on and so on. And eventually, you're then competing for a world title, Golden Gloves. But there's a whole process to go
quickly,
through.
yeah.
Hopefully. But some people will never get above club fighting. Because that's ability level, and ability and skill, although they're closely related. Some people are just naturals at whatever they do. I'm not. I've been doing martial arts for actually coming up for 40 years now, which is a terrifying thought. But everything I do, I have to hit in with a hammer. My own teacher, Sifu Singh, will tell you that I'm one of the most stubborn people to get things through. And it's not that he's not legitimately one of the best teachers in the world. It's just because I'm really stubborn when I'm learning things. So pressure for me, it's a gradual exposure to aspects of chaos. But here's the thing. The chaos has to go up, but it also has to come down. One of the faults of pressure training is we always look at pressure as an escalating scale to ultimately that final point. Say that's, lethal force if we're using it within policing framework. But pressure can also come back. Can I come down? Because pressure can go up, pressure can come down. In training, can I turn it down? And can the trainee come down with me? And ultimately, what we're looking at doing is developing a relationship. Pressure is ultimately a relationship-based endeavor. Am I interacting with the person as they're feeding me? Am I responding to what they're doing? Have they gone high? Can I meet them there? Can I go one higher? Can I bring them down low? Can I bring myself down to a position where I can respond appropriately? And a lot of the times, we lack that piece. It's all about going harder and faster rather than slower and softer. This isn't the same as, kumbayaing people in a riot situation or anything like that. It's just knowing that you have the capacity to do so. One of the things that gives me confidence. So, sorry, didn't mean to talk over there.
No. Go ahead. I agree. Yeah.
So one of the things that gives us confidence in our ability to deal with situations is having a physical skill set that we can call upon. Baton, firearm, empty-handed skills, etc., etc., etc. So we know we can go to a high level. We then need to be able to come down to a lower level as well. So we have this entire cornucopia of options laid before us. We just then select the right one at the right time. But the right time can come and go. I can go in at 20,000 feet and I might have to land again very shortly afterwards. No decision is an end in and of itself. The ends and the means are always just means, because we never truly get to the end of any given situation.
I like how you said that. The ends and the means, the ends are just more means because we never really get to the end of it. And I think you've already kind of said this, and in other conversations I've had with many of the other trainers coming to ILEETA this year, is context is everything. In fact, actually, Von Claim is actually teaching a class almost entirely on context. And many of the conversations I've had with others, in fact, I was talking with Dwayne Bryant the other day, and he reminded me, and it's something we all know to be true, is that in every single encounter, there are at least two nervous systems involved in that situation, at least two. And
100%.
each one of those nervous systems is experiencing their own hormonal and electrical rushes that kind of pass through us as emotions and feelings that range everywhere from fear to excitement, right? It's everything in between. And so as you were talking about that, it kind of brought me into the space of context being the main thing that we have to get right. We meet them where they are. We bring the training intensity up where pressure builds, and then bring it down and see if they can adjust to it. So you had talked earlier about the boxing piece of it and a lot of static striking drills and that sort of thing. But then you also talk a lot about context and finding yourself in situations where everybody has a plan until they get punched in the face, right? So where do you find that sweet spot between static drills and open environment where context leads decision making and pressure dictates what's done?
I like to put it into pieces. And I don't like the idea of giving answers. I don't train answers, I train adaptability. And I don't solve scenarios. I teach people to solve themselves in a given situation. And that's ultimately where I put a lot of the training piece on, because you're always going to find something that you've not prepared for or never encountered before. The only constant in any situation is me. Even if I've arrested that same person before, or it's a rounder, as we used to call them back in the day, that's still not going to be the same scenario. It's just I have history with that person that I can draw upon to help channel the interaction. So in any given situation, I have to adapt to what is actually happening. And I think that's one of the biggest pieces. What am I seeing, which is my perception? Am I balanced and functional, which is my posture? And what am I legally and ethically justified to do here, which is the permission? So we have perception, posture, and permission. If I can tick 3 of those, I'm probably going to be good to go. If I'm balanced and functional and legally placed, but I don't know what's going on, I have a big gap I need to fill there. If I can see what's going on, I'm legally placed to do it, but I'm not in a position to act, I have to fix my posture. And if I can see what's going on, I'm fully balanced and ready, but I can't act on it, I need to wait until it presents itself or get further evidence which will then color my actions. I like the idea of simple frameworks, and it's not a knock on departmental policies or all the systems that go in place. But if you take something, we'll take a legal example, theft. Okay, we all know if you take something that not belong to you, that's theft. Or is it? Well, it depends on a jurisdiction. In the United Kingdom, theft is defined as dishonestly appropriating property belonging to another person with intent to permanently deprive them thereof. That's one of those definitions I learned within my first week at the academy, and I swear it's going to be seared into my brain until the day I die.
There's a key element in there that you don't hear in every context regarding theft is the permanent piece of it, as far as
And here's the punchline. Because we have an offence in the UK, we actually have one in Canada as well, and in the US, I'm pretty sure you got something similar, called taking without consent, or in Canada, taking a conveyance, and it's when you take a vehicle and bugger off with it. That offence came about because the person was charged with theft in court, but they had no intention of permanently taking it. They just wanted to go for a ride. Now, cases were tried to be made that, well, you might have crashed it, or you might have done this, that, and the other, but they didn't. And therefore theft didn't apply. So you didn't tick those boxes. So they then had to create a whole new offense. Now, am I expecting myself or an officer operational to remember every single dictionary definition? No, it's ridiculous to do so. That's what the courts are for. That's what the hearing sergeants are for. The custody sergeants are for. Have I met my threshold? Blah, 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 blah. Someone has taken something. I then take it forward, we build the case, and ultimately the strength or weakness of the case is decided at a court level. I cannot be expected to remember every single facet of law, but it breaks down to be nice to people and be nice to things. Everything else kind of falls in the middle of those two. So when we're looking at a decision-making framework, we need something which I will be able to scale and adapt under pressure. The risk example I gave earlier, once you got what do I know, what don't I know, the rest kind of takes care of itself. You can break it down and say this becomes a high risk trigger, and that's something we fold into practice moving forward. But I know and I don't know. That's what I have. So when I came up with reality check, the original idea, which is ironic because we're now kind of coming full circle, was to take what I learned in policing and apply that to a civilian setting to give members of the public the idea of the realities of things. It's now sort of flipped itself around back on a head a bit, and it's coming back into the policing sphere. But it's a 3 anchor based system. Map and terrain. Most training maps don't always match the terrain you find yourself on, and you fall apart within that gap. The cognitive collapse. Again, I firmly believe that most failures within policing are not from bad intention. It's cognitive collapse under a high stress situation. And the final piece is the articulation piece. If you can explain your decision, then you're probably making good decisions. If you can't explain your decision, you might need to question what's the gap, why are you unable to do that? And I firmly believe that we can train thinking, talking, and decisions exactly the same way we treat punching, kicking, and arresting. It's a skill like anything else. We tend to look at it as almost an afterthought. Talk them down first, and if that doesn't work, then go hands on. Okay, great. What have we done to teach you to talk them down? And even that, you can't make anyone else talk like you. You can't have it in a box. Talking and interactions are human pieces. And that's what I want to be at the core of everything that we do, the human element, that reactive aspect. Am I in this relationship with me and this person, positive, negative, indifferent, however it is and however it's unfolding? That will be different every single time. And that chaos is where I have to learn to thrive. And that unknown is where I have to adapt.
Yeah. There's so much in there. I'm really enjoying how the system is built upon systems. And you had mentioned earlier that it's the systems that fail people, right? And if we
Yes.
can build the systems and train within them appropriately, then we can be much more confident in what we know, and much more confident in the chaos of situations when we don't know, that we at least have some fallback skills. I want to revisit with you as we come towards the end of this conversation here. I really liked the 3P thing that you had talked about a couple of different times and ways, is that perception, posture, and position. And
Permission.
Permission. Yeah, thank you. Sorry about that. Perception, posture, and permission. And let's talk first about the perceptions, because you had given a couple other indicators throughout this. Like, for instance, when you walked into that situation in the bar and the bouncer and the gentleman were having their conversation, they said, keep jogging. Our biases and the situations where we find ourselves in, projecting what that outcome is going to be. I think that falls into the perception piece, but I think you also kind of had a little bit in there about your own self-awareness and that kind of stuff. So talk to me just briefly about perception and how you train that under the conditions in which you train.
One of the best tools I was ever introduced to was during the advanced driver's course. And that's the narration of the journey. So I'm sure you've done very, very similar, but we did this specifically in the UK, where you're driving along, mirror check, car coming up my left-hand side, changing gear, moving there, moving left-hand side, nothing coming, and you narrate the whole thing. I have an exercise I do where I'll get people to walk from point A to point B. And then I'll say, okay, now walk, and I'll put something on the floor. Now walk back and pick that up. It's about as simple an exercise as I can get. If I go lower than that, it's breathe in, breathe out, which I can actually still use for this. What I then get them to do is repeat the exercise, but tell me what they're doing at each step of the way. And what tends to happen is they barely get past 2 steps, because their brain, their higher function kicks in, and it's like, well, my muscle is, and everything then slows down. When we look at perception of things, we have to be able to act like a radar. We see, blip, there's one on the radar that might be worth paying attention to, or there's nothing on that radar. So the perception of things tends to be colored by our experiences, our skill set, what state we're in, their behaviors, their attitudes, the old Bataris box thing, their attitude influences their behavior, influences my attitude, influences my behavior, and then blah, 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 blah. And of course, the only thing we actually have any control over is our behavior. Even our attitude, we really can't control. We can start to see changes come into it, but that's so hardwired into us. That's a long-term strategy, a long-term change. The only thing we have absolute control over at any given moment in time is our behavior. And that's the perception thing. I perceive where I'm at. And by controlling my behavior, that allows things to slow down a little bit. And it makes me almost a pilot rather than a participant. Seeing what is actually happening relies being able to see what I know and be aware of what I don't know, which comes right back to what I said at the beginning, being open to new information. We tend to want to put things in very nice categories. UDA,
I was
Captain
going to
Boyd
bring
came
up
up.
UDA and how this very much applies to orientation, which is often very oversimplified in a
Yeah,
lot
it
of
is.
conversations. But you are bringing it into the space where I think Boyd really wanted it to be. And so, yeah, please continue.
Yeah, absolutely. At the end of the day, though, UDA wasn't an invention. It's not like we were sort of bimbling around chaotic, like pinball machines bouncing off the walls before Boyd came along and said, hang on a minute, lads, have we tried doing this? It was just simply a codified way of looking at combat. Bruce Lee, another example, he came out with 5 ways of attack, but he didn't. He just codified it.
Right.
So this process is natural. We perceive things all the time. Those little instincts at the back of our head, that, you know, the spider sensor's going off, that's your body knowing something's going wrong, but it can't get the memory back. It just recognizes that feeling. So the mind-body connection is also part of that perception. We have to sometimes override it, of course, because how many times have we wanted to get maybe a little bit more rambunctious with a person than perhaps we probably should do in the circumstances? So we override our thought processes and put a physical response in there. But what we perceive, we see all. I firmly believe we see all, but we don't recognize all. And perception for me is the ability to recognize, not see, recognize. Because as everything that I see is a potential threat, a potential risk, I just don't know what it is yet. I'm currently sat in my own home. There's no one in here that I know of, but there could be someone behind the door. You know, I don't want to get into a Schrodinger's cat situation. There's both someone behind that door and not behind that door until I open it. But I have an idea of what's going on. I can see everything, but, you know, it's that recognition that makes a difference in the actions.
Absolutely. And I would also challenge that behind every door could be a risk, but behind every door could also be a reward. And I think sometimes there's the that fine dance we play. And I was actually kind of lining up in my head as you were talking, what if I could like spend time with Dwayne Bryant, with Michael Cantrell, and you in the same day and have these conversations, which, oh, by the way, at ILEETA can be done at least within the same week. Some of what you're saying there, you know, in a conversation I was having with Michael was you walk into a chow hall in a prison, right? He's a prison guard. We read that room. We don't know what exactly it is we're feeling, what that person is giving off, but micro expressions are telling us something. The proxemics between these two groups is telling us something. Whatever it is, we're picking up on it. And sometimes, and you hit the nail on the head, recognizing it. In this moment, I see it, but being aware of it isn't necessarily sufficient enough. It's recognizing it. And that's that big perception piece. Tell me about posture.
Posture is balanced and functional. At its simplest level, that's the boxing. Feet apart, shoulder width, toes up, hands up, like that. That's my posture. But posture also refers to, am I balanced within myself?
Good.
Can I talk clearly? Am I already angry? Am I still carrying what I had from the scenario I dealt with 10 minutes ago before this priority call came in, and then I suddenly found coming to that? And posture simply refers to your ability to react. That's it. And your ability to react is physical, emotional, and mental. Am I well placed?
Am I ready to go in
Correct.
this moment for what's in front of me? And if not, and you mentioned something earlier that may mean that I need to adjust my posture. And when I heard you say it earlier, I was immediately went to the footing, or am I behind cover, but I think you even alluded to it in that initial statement where it's bigger than that. It is, do I take a deep breath and I recognize my attitude and how it's affecting my behavior, Atari's box, and now I change my behaviors here, right? Is that what I'm hearing you say a little bit?
100%. It's all encompassing. You cannot separate the mind and the body. You can't. So what we have to do is make sure they're working well together. And the more we add things and add extra bits and pieces, the harder it gets to recall under pressure. We end up with the hourglass. There's only so much sand can come through that point. So we have to make sure that what's getting through is the right grains. want them lost at the back while the other stuff's getting through that hourglass and that jam. We lose careers and cases in 5 seconds of panic. And we need to make sure that take the extra second to make everything real.
Wow. We lose careers and cases, and in some cases lives, in those few seconds of panic. And I think we talk all the time about rushing to failure and that sort of thing. And this really tells me my perception of the situation and my position within it tells me how quickly I am allowed to move. And I think that may be where we go next with permissions. Is that
permission? Yes, very much so.
Okay.
The permission piece is, I work in threes a lot. I'm a massive believer in threes. I think it keeps things very, very simple. Most people can remember 3, and then they can remember another 3 and another 3 and so on. But most of the threes become simple. Permission is legal, ethical, and moral. If I can take all 3 of those in my actions, I'm pretty good to go. If something's legal, ethical, and moral, we're off to the races. And the way I draw the distinctions between them is legal is at a state level and a countrywide level. That's the law. What the law says can be black and white. Not always a good thing either. We have a casual glance through any country's history, and you'll find things that were in law, and you're like, "Oh my goodness,
how'd that make it in there?" Yeah,
yep. Exactly. That's simply horrible. The law itself isn't enough, but it has to be the anchor for everything else that we do. Yeah. I always say to people, you will never survive history. No matter what you do and how well you do it, in 200 years' time from now, someone is going to be looking at you in a Bako foil silver suit and going, "He did what?" Like that. And
yeah,
exactly. So you're never going to survive history. So all you can do is just be what you are at that moment in time. So the law is that anchor piece. Ethics is the governance of a group, whether that's a societal group, an employment group, like the ethics of being a doctor, the ethics of being a police officer, the ethics of a teacher. The ethics of being raised on a council estate in Manchester is very different than the ethics of being raised in a posh part of Kensington and London, for example, because that's the group think. So we have the law, which is the state think, the ethics, which is the group think, and morality, which is the you think. Now, of all the ones, the morality is the ones that a lot of people, that's the hill they'll choose to die on. To an extent, within a law enforcement capacity, our morality is the less of the 3 because we're operating for the benefit of the group on behalf of the state. So sometimes we end up enforcing rules and situations that we don't necessarily concur with, but that's what our job, our task, and we have to do for the group. I don't want to make it a political statement, but COVID was a good example of that. And a lot of officers resigned because they took a moral stand over an ethical and legal position. I have no problem with that. And that's another thing that reality check's important about. I don't tell you what to do. That isn't my job. You do what you do. Just make sure that you can explain why you have done it.
That's that articulation piece you talked about as well in your other group of
100%. And that's the bit that's missing from most. Most people don't learn how to talk. Right. And talking isn't just with the person there.
Express their morality. I think, I'm a huge fan of Kouzes and Posner and the Leadership Challenge and all of the research done over the last nearly 4 decades. And one of the things that they are very clear about when it comes to values, they refer to them more in the values language, but it's the same thing, legal, ethical, moral. And people are more inclined to follow you if you are their leader, if you're clear about your morality, as you describe it here, versus how well you can recite the ethics of the group or the laws of the land and adhere to them. Am I willing to stand on what I believe, and can I articulate that? And you've really hammered that home here. And I think that has so much to do with decision making under pressure. Jay, you've given like great examples of both on the mat, off the mat, on the streets, in the bars, of where pressure is tested and performance matters. And that's literally what I'm seeing kind of coming to this class at ILEETA. And I really enjoyed how I've seen like the spectrum here of how this connects to other conversations that I've been having. And that's one of the great things about the ILEETA conference is you're going to leave Jay's class and go over to pick a class, one taught by John Bostain or Lon Bartel or whoever, and you're going to find a similar conversation, very supportive in context. Context is everything. And so this is super exciting, Jay. Thank you for submitting the proposal. I've been excited about this since the beginning. What I'd like to do is, as we've come here to the last few minutes of this conversation today, I want to turn it over to you. Any last thoughts on if somebody's on the fence about whether or not they're going to attend this class? When there's so many great classes on ILEETA, tell me, what am I going to walk out of your class with? And or actually, let's start with this. What should I expect while I'm in your class, and what am I going to walk out with?
So the idea behind reality check is closing that gap between training and actual pressure. And I want to look at how we think, decide, and perform when stress is high and the time is limited. I want it to give more than just techniques. I want it to be a thought process and an approach that holds up in real life. And again, I come back to that idea that most failures are not bad intentions. They're an inability to respond properly to what's going on, and it's a cognitive overload. Good people can lose clarity for a few seconds, and that can change the rest of their lives. I think if people want to prepare, just come ready to think, move, challenge assumptions. I'll give drills that you can take on the one day and run on the Monday, and a framework that will change how you'll see pressure.
Awesome. Jay, this is super exciting, and I'm very grateful that you're joining us, and I'm looking forward to seeing you there. So, ladies and gentlemen, once again, the ILEETA 2026 Conference and Expo scheduled for March 16th through the 21st in St. Louis, Missouri. This is one amazing class, but it is one of well over 120 that we have available. And so, Jay, once again, thank you. Do you mind sticking around for a few minutes? I have a couple of other questions for you.
I'd be happy to, and thank you for having me on. It's been an absolute honor and a privilege.
Awesome. Thanks.